Early morning settles over Skyline Plaza as the janitor's entry log marks 6:42. The elevator doors open, releasing him into a corridor lit by motion sensors. The air remains still, undisturbed by human movement for hours. His path follows routine: a checklist, a cart, and a quiet walk toward the 17th floor break room. The door yields easily. There is no resistance, no indicator of forced entry. What he sees next interrupts the sequence of an ordinary morning. A woman lies on the sofa, head angled slightly to the right. Her posture suggests rest, yet the stillness is absolute. A cup sits near her right hand. Steam does not rise, but the surface of the drink holds a faint sheen, the kind that fades slowly, never instantly. This detail becomes relevant only when the janitor steps closer. A sharp, sterile odor lingers in the air, distinct from the mild citrus sanitizers normally used by the building staff. The scent does not belong to any cleaning work done during the night. He calls out. No movement answers. He takes a step back, leaving the room exactly as it is, and alerts security. Minutes later, building personnel confirm the woman's identity through her badge and appearance. According to the site supervisor's statement, her presence is unusual. No overtime request was submitted, and no meeting was scheduled for her department at this hour. Security isolates the room. Documentation begins. Photographs capture the arrangement: the sofa's cushions undisturbed, the low table aligned, and the coffee cup positioned with an almost deliberate neatness. At first glance, nothing contradicts the assumption of sudden collapse. Yet investigators observe details that shift the pattern. The door shows no locking marks. Surfaces appear wiped, not dusty, but unnaturally clean, especially the table's edges. A faint V-shaped abrasion on the floor catches the light, at an angle consistent with shoe movement, but too isolated to depict a struggle. This point doesn't quite align with a natural medical event. At this stage, however, no conclusion can be drawn. The anomaly is documented, referenced, and placed into the preliminary report for later comparison. Forensic guidelines require each observation to be treated independently until a correlation is proven. The corridor camera becomes the next focal point. Its lens faces away from the break room, capturing only a portion of the hallway. According to operational records, it had been realigned the previous evening. The timing of that adjustment stands out, but without further data, the significance remains unclear. Investigators store the camera's angle change in the digital chain of custody log, setting it aside as a potential anchor point. With the scene stabilized, the medical examiner confirms signs inconsistent with sleep: discoloration of the lips, early rigidity, and a subtle lack of protective reflex in the limbs. These indicators suggest a time frame of death several hours before discovery. At the time, no one yet realizes that this window will later overlap with a sequence of digital traces. Attention returns to the coffee cup. Its placement suggests the victim used it shortly before losing consciousness. The surface, however, lacks clear fingerprints. An initial swab reveals faint streaking, as though wiped. This detail only becomes relevant when investigators compare it with the unusual disinfectant odor still present in the air. Every piece of evidence collected: unlocked entry, sterile scent, wiped surfaces, misaligned camera, abrasion on the floor, remains isolated, unable to form a theory. The investigative directive emphasizes that no direction can be pursued until these observations are substantiated by forensic examination. Shinjuku's early morning calm fades as investigators begin mapping the victim's professional environment. According to the administrative files collected within the first operational sweep, Hayashida Kumi's final weeks were shaped by a new assignment: a comprehensive review of major contract portfolios. The task placed her at the intersection of several departments, where inconsistencies in expenditure reports had already raised internal questions. Investigative records established that she maintained a personal folder of documents on her work device, containing draft notes and comparative tables. The content did not identify any individual by name, but the pattern of flagged transactions suggested that she had been preparing for a formal escalation. At the time, no one yet realized how these preliminary findings would influence the suspect pool. Her professional trajectory offers context. Kumi had spent years cultivating a reputation for procedural strictness. Personnel files and statements from colleagues describe her as methodical, direct, and unusually consistent in documenting interactions that affected compliance. This characteristic becomes relevant when investigators examine her final communications. The routine predictability of her conduct creates a baseline against which anomalies can be detected. Operational analysis indicates that tension had developed between Kumi and a colleague, Sakamoto Arena, shortly before the incident. Both were candidates for a managerial promotion, and internal performance reviews placed them in direct comparison. Witness accounts describe a disagreement regarding client handling protocols that occurred several days prior. These accounts do not establish hostility, but they confirm friction. The potential relevance of this friction is left open, because at this stage, the investigative team lacks physical evidence linking Arena to the scene. Still, the proximity of their roles places her within the initial circle of consideration. The second relationship emerges through digital correspondence between Kumi and Tenma Solutions, an external advertising partner. Contract renewal documents show that Kumi had recommended a reevaluation of the partnership, citing cost inefficiencies. The timing of this recommendation aligns with email exchanges demonstrating heightened frustration from the vendor's representative. According to the investigative assessment, such disputes are not unusual in contract cycles, yet the proximity to the victim's review assignment creates an additional point of interest. However, without spatial or temporal connection to the 17th floor environment, this direction remains a theoretical branch rather than a procedural lead. Earlier personal history adds another strand. Records indicate that her former partner, Nagai Toru, had attempted repeated contact in the months preceding the incident. Despite this, there is no documentation of recent in-person encounters. The pattern becomes clearer when investigators correlate his known movements with timestamped location data from his delivery route, revealing no confirmed presence at Skyline Plaza during the critical time frame. Still, at this moment in the investigation, the possibility of indirect involvement cannot be excluded outright. A fourth connection relates to the building owner, Umeda Koji. Contractual disagreements between Umeda and Kumi's department had escalated due to proposed maintenance adjustments. Surveillance logs show that Umeda visited the building the day before the incident. Although this falls outside the preliminary death window, the temporal nearness prompts investigators to mark his name for follow-up inquiry. The significance of this detail only becomes relevant when badge access records for the night of the incident are reviewed, revealing no movement from Umeda within the restricted floors. For now, the file maintains his name as part of the broader administrative landscape affecting Kumi's role. A final strand involves a VIP client, Hirose Yukio. Archived complaint reports show that Hirose had engaged in several contentious exchanges with Kumi regarding account miscommunications. His call log confirms multiple attempts to reach her during the day in question. This point does not yet conflict with any known data, but it indicates emotional volatility within their professional relationship. No GPS or badge access correlation exists to place him near the building during the critical window, but investigators refrain from eliminating him until verification is complete. As each relationship is listed, investigators begin constructing a layered map of proximity, motive, and access. However, the pattern begins to shift when internal device logs from Kumi's workstation undergo technical review. Within the recovered files, timestamps indicate active editing on her contract review notes shortly before her estimated time of death. This suggests she was engaged in work-related evaluation rather than personal communication, shaping a more focused understanding of her final hours. Attention then turns to the folder discovered on her phone, a private collection of notes concerning internal financial discrepancies. The forensic report documents no explicit accusation, Yet the structure of the spreadsheets reveals a comparative methodology often used in early-stage misconduct verification. This point introduces an open question. Did anyone else know she was compiling these documents? There is no immediate evidence to answer it. Investigators suspend the question until digital audits can be cross-referenced with access logs. The transitional layer of analysis arrives when security records show that Kumi's badge registered multiple movements between office floors in the weeks prior, specifically around departments tied to procurement approval. The pattern does not imply misconduct, but indicates a widening of her review scope. The relevance of this movement becomes apparent only when investigators match her badge trajectory with the contract files she had been editing. Connections appear consistent with legitimate review duties, not unsanctioned inquiry. Still, the widening circle of access places her into contact, direct or indirect, with multiple individuals whose job functions intersect with the financial system she was assessing. From this point, each suspect exists not as an accusation, but as a thread awaiting correlation. No conclusion is drawn. The procedural mandate requires that each thread be tested against time, access, and physical location. As the investigative team prepares to analyze building access logs and reconstruct movement patterns, a clearer structure begins to form, but only in outline. The details remain fragmentary, suspended between possibility and verification. The forensic report documents the presence of a central nervous system depressant in the victim's gastric contents. The compound profile aligns with liquid benzodiazepine derivatives, substances that dissolve cleanly and leave little immediate trace. This point becomes relevant when the toxicologist notes the absence of injection marks. According to the investigative assessment, ingestion is the only viable pathway. The finding creates an initial suspicion. The coffee cup discovered beside the victim may have served as the delivery medium. Yet investigators cannot act on assumption. They begin a controlled analysis of the cup's surface. Swabs collected from the rim and exterior reveal faint streaking. Under infrared spectrometry, these streaks resolve into chlorhexidine molecules of a concentration used in hospital-grade disinfectants. Operational analysis indicates that this formulation does not match any product stocked within Skyline Plaza. At the time of discovery, no one yet understands how this disinfectant connects to the broader chain of events. However, the anomaly forces investigators to halt and reconsider the narrative suggested by the room's tidy condition. The cup becomes the first item entered into the chain of custody pathway for chemical correlation. Each data point is logged. Discovery at 6:52, transfer to forensic processing at 08:17, and spectrographic analysis completed by mid-afternoon. The sequence is important because the next procedural step requires cross-referencing with internal building systems. If the cup was wiped, then someone handled it with intent. To identify the time frame of that handling, investigators pivot to surveillance footage. CCTV logs from the 17th floor show Kumi's arrival at approximately 20:30. She exits the elevator alone. Her pace is steady. Nothing in her posture suggests distress. According to operational timestamps, her entry on this floor coincides with a digital notification she received minutes earlier, an internal meeting alert scheduled for 20:30. This detail only becomes relevant when information technology staff confirm that the meeting does not exist within the corporate scheduling system. A fabricated alert suggests unauthorized device access. Yet investigators refrain from forming conclusions. Instead, device metadata is routed for network origin tracing. Parallel to digital analysis, physical inspection of hallway surveillance raises a second anomaly. The corridor camera nearest the break room is found angled away from the door. This matches a maintenance log entry documenting a camera adjustment the previous evening. When investigators examine the timestamp of that adjustment, they discover that it aligns with an employee card scan at a nearby reader panel. The badge number is recorded. The data, however, is not immediately interpreted. The investigative team must first confirm whether the adjustment was routine or deliberate. This requires interviews and cross-checking with access protocols. Attention then returns to the abrasion observed on the floor. The forensic unit lifts a small trace sample, minute rubber fragments pressed into the surface layer of the laminate. Microscopic comparison identifies a distinct wear pattern resembling a V-shaped split typical of Fuji Pro work shoes. According to procurement records, this model is not distributed building-wide. A fabric analysis provides the next layer. A gray fiber recovered from the sofa's edge is examined under polarized light. Its napped texture and synthetic blend match the inner lining of winter jackets issued to the same division. The correlation suggests proximity between the victim and a person wearing that garment type, yet it does not indicate when the transfer occurred. At this moment, the investigative team documents the fiber's origin and suspends interpretation pending cross-reference with physical clothing samples. Digital forensics advances the investigation further. Network logs isolate the source device responsible for sending the unauthorized meeting alert to Kumi. Its origin point is traced to a workstation connected at the time to the internal router cluster servicing the East Sales Division. The MAC address identifies a specific desk. Its assigned user is Fujita Ryo. Investigators study this result without immediate comment. A generates suspicion. The falsified meeting may have been intentionally created. But B contradicts immediate escalation. Shared network infrastructure occasionally routes traffic through adjacent workstations. The pathway remains open until the system administrator confirms device authentication. Only then does the hypothesis progress to C. The message was sent from a device linked directly to Fujita's login environment. While this technical analysis unfolds, parallel investigative branches eliminate other early suspects through strictly verifiable alibis. Badge records show that Arena left the building before 20 Road. GPS data from Nagai's delivery route confirms he was several districts away during the relevant time frame. Time clock and access data from Tenma Solutions place their representative in another ward entirely. Surveillance and badge analysis exclude both Umeda and Hirose. Neither individual appears within the critical corridor during the operational window. One detail begins to shift the pattern. Kumi's solitary presence on the 17th floor after 2030 is confirmed repeatedly through elevator logs. No one else enters through standard access routes in the next 20 minutes. Yet the wiped coffee cup, the disinfectant traces, the fiber, and the V-shaped abrasion indicate an additional presence inside the room. The inconsistency forces investigators to narrow the list to individuals with the capability, authorization, or opportunity to bypass standard entry detection. Cross-referencing access logs reveals that a single badge registers near the adjusted camera at the exact timestamp of the surveillance shift. The badge belongs to Fujita. Still, no conclusion is drawn. Investigators request his footwear, jacket, and workstation logs for correlation. Investigative records establish that the name emerging across multiple evidence pathways belongs to a long-serving employee of the East Sales Division, Fujita Ryo, age 39. His personnel file outlines a stable employment history, marked by consistent if unremarkable performance. For more than a decade, his record shows punctual attendance, satisfactory evaluations, and limited interpersonal conflict. At the time, no one yet realizes that a shift in his internal trajectory begins months before the incident, documented only through procedural notes and administrative correspondence. The shift becomes visible when accounting staff flag a series of irregular travel expenses. The discrepancies are small but persistent. According to internal compliance policy, the case is transferred to a routine verifier, Hayashida Kumi. Her review notes, preserved in the company archive, indicate that the issue required clarification. The correspondence between them is professional, concise, and time-stamped. Nothing in the text implies personal animosity, yet investigators observe a subtle pattern. After the expense correction request, Fujita's email volume drops, his login times become erratic, and his movement within the building narrows to essential routes only. This detail only becomes relevant when investigators later compare his movements with the evidence timeline. Human resources records document further administrative developments. A demotion is listed as a pending recommendation, awaiting final review. Investigative analysis identifies the potential impact of this detail, though no psychological interpretation is stated. Instead, the record shows a measurable change in workplace behavior, a reduction in voluntary interactions, limited replies to team messages, and the absence of participation in departmental meetings. The forensic value of this behavioral context emerges when the timeline reconstruction begins. The earliest point of intersection occurs at the corridor camera. Maintenance logs confirm that the device was manually adjusted. Access panel data show that a single badge was scanned at the control box during the relevant minute. The badge belongs to Fujita. At this moment, investigators do not interpret intent, they only document spatial and temporal overlap. A introduces suspicion. The person near the camera matches the only badge registered at the panel. But B complicates the picture. Maintenance staff confirm that the camera had been reported unstable earlier in the week, meaning its adjustment could have been routine. Thus, the path to C remains open. Further corroboration is required before the badge activity gains evidentiary weight. Attention moves to the internal meeting notification. Network tracing identifies the device origin. The digital signature corresponds to a workstation in the East Sales Division. Investigative records establish that the last authenticated login on that workstation before the alert was Fujita's. Authentication logs show the device remained active in the 10 minutes leading up to the notification. This point doesn't quite align with the explanation later offered by Fujita, who states in an administrative interview that he left his desk early that evening. The discrepancy is noted, but not interpreted. Investigators must first confirm the workstation's physical location, user access rights, and potential for unauthorized use. Next, operational analysis examines badge movement on the night of the incident. While Kumi enters the 17th floor at 20:30, another badge registers in the vicinity 15 minutes earlier. The record identifies Fujita's ID. His entry does not reach the break room door, but the system shows him entering the general corridor where the camera adjustment took place. The spatial alignment between badge data and camera adjustment becomes a second point requiring validation. Parallel forensic pathways continue to converge. The gray fiber recovered from the sofa edge is compared with jacket samples from all employees in the East Sales Division. Another sequence emerges through the chemical analysis of the coffee cup. The disinfectant traces correspond to chlorhexidine formulations used in private hospitals. Personnel records indicate that Fujita has a sibling employed at such a facility. This detail only becomes relevant when investigators examine how chlorhexidine might enter a non-medical workplace. They find no evidence of authorized storage or distribution within Skyline Plaza. The provenance remains a question, one that gains significance only in combination with other findings. According to the investigative assessment, reconstructing Fujita's psychological state relies entirely on procedural data. There are no journals, no personal messages, no recorded expressions of hostility. Instead, investigators map measurable conditions: a pending demotion, a prior compliance dispute involving Kumi, withdrawal from workplace communication, and decreasing mobility within the building. When these administrative indicators are placed beside the forensically documented timeline, badge scans, workstation access, camera adjustment, fiber transfer, and digital notification activity, a picture forms through accumulation, not interpretation. The sequence of events on the night of the incident is then re-examined. Investigative records establish that Fujita's badge activity places him near the critical corridor. His workstation is the point of origin for the meeting notification that directed Kumi to the 17th floor. His jacket lining matches the fiber found at the scene. His access to chlorhexidine is indirect yet plausible based on familial employment. No single data point stands alone. Instead, each connects to a structurally consistent pathway that reflects opportunity, proximity, and access. The timeline reconstruction begins with the confirmed arrival of the victim. Investigative records establish that her elevator entry at 20:30 aligns precisely with the internal notification she received minutes earlier. She walks toward the break room with documents in hand. Nothing in her movements indicates hesitation. This detail only becomes relevant when investigators overlay her path with badge scanning data from the preceding quarter hour. According to the investigative assessment, another employee accessed the same corridor shortly before her arrival. The badge belongs to Fujita Ryo. His movement is recorded near the maintenance panel during the interval when the corridor camera shifts off angle. At this moment, the investigative team is forced to halt. The data confirms presence but not action. The next step requires synchronizing his badge activity with workstation logs. Technical analysis identifies his workstation as the origin of the meeting alert sent to Kumi. The workstation is authenticated by his login credentials at the exact window when the alert is issued. Given this statement, the sequence should have shown his departure afterward. Yet network logs continue to register his device as active beyond his claimed logout time. The discrepancy prompts investigators to map the surrounding minutes. Operational analysis indicates that the break room's coffee machine is used at approximately 20:45. Temperature decay curves from the cup confirm a similar time frame. The correlation suggests the beverage was prepared shortly before the victim consumed it. The cup contains traces of benzodiazepine derivatives, and its surface carries chlorhexidine residue consistent with hospital-grade disinfectant. At the time, no one yet realizes how this disinfectant entered the building, but the residue offers a measurable link to the preparatory phase of the incident. When investigators reconstruct positions inside the break room, the V-shaped abrasion on the floor marks a single pivot point near the low table. The abrasion resembles the wear pattern found on Fuji Pro work shoes. These shoes are assigned to the East Sales Division. Forensic comparison later confirms the pattern is consistent with one of the pairs collected from Fujita. The match does not establish intent, it anchors physical presence. The fiber transferred to the sofa becomes the next trace. Its composition and degree of nap wear correspond to the lining of Fujita's winter jacket. This point introduces an open question. Did this transfer occur earlier in the day or within the operational window when the victim entered the break room? The question remains unanswered until investigators overlay timeline segments. Kumi is alone on the floor after 20:30. No other employees with access to the same jacket type appear in the building during that period. The fiber's placement near the sofa's edge gains increasing relevance. As investigators align digital, spatial, and chemical evidence, a coherent structure begins to form. The forensic report documents no defensive wounds, no evidence of struggle, and no signs of forced ingestion. This supports the hypothesis that the victim consumed the substance voluntarily, unaware of its contents. The timeline offers a plausible sequence. The victim sits, places her documents on the table, and begins reviewing them. She reaches for the cup. Within minutes, sedation progresses. She loses consciousness before any protective reflex can activate. According to elevator logs, a departure occurs at 22:05. The badge associated with this movement belongs to Fujita. Surveillance from the lobby confirms his exit. The timing overlaps with the established death window. When questioned, he denies being present on the 17th floor. However, his statements conflict with workstation logs, badge records, and digital authentication entries. Given the statement, his position should have aligned with the alibi he attempted to establish. It does not. Prosecutors later assemble the evidentiary chain. Each link, motive, opportunity, access, trace material, digital origin, chemical residue, rests on independent verification. None relies on conjecture. The court determines that the environment was manipulated to resemble a natural collapse, exploiting the victim's trust and routine work habits. The ruling concludes that the combination of fabricated communication, controlled timing, and chemical sedation constitutes premeditated deception, followed by evidence tampering and unauthorized system manipulation. Investigative records establish that Fujita Ryo receives a sentence of 22 years. The decision cites systematic breach of workplace trust and intentional orchestration of circumstances designed to mask criminal causation.